The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small, cluttered room where Aisha sat at her makeshift desk. The desk was really just a wooden crate covered with an old cloth, but it was enough for her to spread out her notes and practice answers for the interview she had dreamed about for weeks. She had studied late into the night, memorizing technical terms and preparing for every possible question. Her heart swelled with determination. Today could be the turning point of her life. If she could just land this job, she could help her widowed mother and pay for her younger brother's schooling. She stood and looked into the cracked mirror by the bed. Her face was gentle, framed by dark hair she had carefully brushed back into a neat bun. Her eyes carried both nervousness and quiet strength. But when she looked at her clothes, she felt a familiar stab of insecurity. The blouse was clean but faded, the skirt slightly worn at the edges. She had ironed them carefully, doing her best to make them look presentable, but she knew they couldn't compare to the sleek outfits she had seen on professional women in the city. She slipped on her only pair of shoes, scuffed but polished, and whispered a prayer. The bus ride into the city was long and crowded. She clutched her folder of documents tightly against her chest, ignoring the curious glances of strangers. Every bump in the road made her wonder if she would still arrive on time. She repeated her prepared introduction under her breath. My name is Aisha. I am hardworking, eager to learn, and passionate about contributing to your company. The words gave her courage, even as the thought of rejection gnawed at her. When the tall glass building finally came into view, her breath caught. It was more beautiful than she imagined, its polished walls reflecting the morning sky. She hesitated at the entrance, smoothing her blouse nervously before pushing through the revolving doors. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and modern furniture, so clean it felt like another world. Behind the reception desk sat a woman in a fitted blazer and sharp heels, her hair perfectly styled. Aisha approached timidly, offering a smile. Good morning. I'm here for the interview. The receptionist's eyes swept over her outfit in a single glance. Her smile was tight, polite, but her gaze lingered with faint disapproval. Name, Aisha Khan. The receptionist tapped at her keyboard, then handed her a visitor's badge. Take a seat, they'll call you. Aisha sat on one of the cushioned chairs near a group of other applicants. They were all dressed in sleek suits and elegant dresses, their confidence evident as they chatted among themselves. One young man laughed loudly about his father's connections in the industry. Another woman, with a designer handbag resting on her lap, scrolled casually through her phone. Aisha shifted in her seat, hugging her folder tighter. She felt invisible, like a shadow in the corner of the room. Minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, her name was called. She rose quickly, her palms damp with sweat, and followed a staff member down a long hallway. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floor, each step making her heart beat faster. The interview room was brightly lit, with a long table where 3 panelists sat. They were sharply dressed, their expressions unreadable. Aisha greeted them softly, bowing her head slightly, but she noticed how their eyes flicked over her clothes before she even sat down. One of the men, adjusting his tie, leaned back in his chair. Miss Khan, this is a highly competitive position. We expect our candidates to reflect the professionalism of our company image. Do you understand? Yes, sir, she said quickly, her voice steady though her stomach churned. I've prepared extensively for. The woman on the panel interrupted, her tone cool. Your qualifications on paper are fine, but presentation is equally important. First impressions matter in our business. Aisha's words caught in her throat. She wanted to explain that her clothes didn't define her capabilities, that she had studied harder than anyone in that waiting room, that she had given up meals to afford the bus fare here. But the looks on their faces told her nothing she said would matter. They had already decided. The third panelist closed her file with a snap. Thank you for coming. We'll be in touch. It was over. Just like that. Aisha stood, her legs trembling, and forced a polite smile. Thank you for your time. She turned and walked out, her vision blurring. The hallway seemed longer now, colder. By the time she stepped back into the lobby, her chest felt heavy with shame. She had given everything she could, but it wasn't enough, not because of her skills, but because of her clothes. She paused near the exit, taking a deep breath. The laughter of the other applicants echoed faintly from the waiting area. Clutching her folder against her chest, she whispered to herself, maybe next time, maybe next time. But her voice cracked, betraying the weight of her disappointment as she stepped out into the glaring sunlight, unsure if her dream would ever be within reach. The heat outside the glass building pressed down on Aisha as she walked toward the bus stop, her eyes fixed on the ground so no one would notice the tears threatening to spill. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though rejection itself had clung to her shoulders. The folder in her hands, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a cruel reminder of wasted effort. She thought of her mother waiting anxiously at home, expecting good news. How could she tell her that she wasn't even given a fair chance? Her bus was still minutes away. She sat on the edge of the curb, careful to keep her skirt clean, and closed her eyes. She tried to remind herself of the prayers she whispered that morning, of the faith her mother had in her, but the sting of humiliation burned deeper than any reassurance could reach. She had worked so hard, yet her appearance had decided her worth before she spoke a single word. "Excuse me, miss," a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned quickly and saw an elderly man standing just outside the building's revolving doors. His hands trembled as he bent down to pick up a leather briefcase, but in the motion, a stack of papers slipped from his grip and scattered across the ground. Some flew dangerously close to the gutter. Without hesitation, Aisha rushed forward. "Here, let me help you." She knelt on the sidewalk, gathering the papers carefully, tapping the edges against her palm to straighten them. The man smiled faintly, his face lined with age but his eyes warm with gratitude. "Thank you, my dear," he said softly. "I can't seem to keep up with my own clumsiness these days." "It's no trouble at all," Aisha replied, handing him the neat stack. She noticed the small tremor in his hands and slid the rest of the documents gently into the briefcase for him. "Do you need me to carry this for you?" The man chuckled, adjusting his spectacles. "You're very kind. Not many young people stop to help anymore. Everyone is always in such a hurry." Aisha smiled faintly, though her heart still ached. "Sometimes we all just need a little kindness." He studied her face for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Were you here for the interviews today?" She froze. "Yes, but it didn't go well." "Ah." The man didn't press further. Instead, he gestured to the bench near the bus stop. "Would you sit with me for a moment? These legs aren't what they used to be." Out of politeness, Aisha nodded. They sat together, the city buzzing around them. For a few moments, silence lingered, broken only by the sound of traffic. "You know," the man began, his voice calm but steady, "when I was your age, I had nothing. Not even shoes on my feet. I was laughed at more times than I can count. People assumed I had no future because of how I looked." Aisha turned to him, surprised. "What did you do?" "I kept working," he said simply. "I knew that clothes could be changed one day, but character, that is harder to find and harder to build. And when the right eyes notice, no one can take that away from you." His words sank deep into her heart. She wanted to believe them, but the bitterness of rejection still lingered. "Sometimes it feels like no one is even willing to see who I really am," she admitted, her voice trembling. The man gave her a knowing smile, as though her words carried more weight than she realized. "Sometimes people judge too quickly. But fate has a way of revealing the truth, even when we least expect it." Before she could respond, his phone rang. He excused himself, answering in a tone that suddenly carried surprising authority. "Yes, I'll be back upstairs shortly. Hold the board meeting until I arrive." Aisha blinked. Board meeting? She glanced at him more carefully now. His suit, though simple, was finely made. His briefcase looked expensive, and the way he spoke, calm, commanding, yet respected, didn't match the image of an ordinary employee. But she didn't question it. She only stood when her bus finally arrived, offering him another polite smile. "It was nice meeting you. And thank you, for your words." He inclined his head. "The pleasure was mine. Remember what I told you, young lady. Don't let others' blindness make you forget your own worth." With that, she boarded the bus. As it rumbled away, she looked out the window and saw him standing there, watching thoughtfully. She had no idea that the man she had helped was not just any employee but the company's founder, a man whose single encounter with her would soon change everything. Inside the building, the founder straightened his back and walked toward the elevators. His mind replayed the kindness and humility of the girl who had been so quickly dismissed. A frown tugged at his lips. If my managers are turning away people like her, what else are they overlooking? And with that question, a decision began forming in his heart, one that would alter the course of Aisha's life forever. The following week, Aisha tried to bury the memory of her rejection, but it clung to her like a shadow. She threw herself into small tutoring jobs to earn a little money, avoiding the subject whenever her mother asked if she had heard back from the company. Each time she shook her head, she saw the disappointment flicker across her mother's eyes before being hidden with a forced smile. Guilt gnawed at her. She had wanted so badly to change their lives, but instead she had returned with nothing. What she didn't know was that inside the very company that had dismissed her, a storm was quietly brewing. The elderly man she had helped outside, the founder himself, Mr. Rahman, was not pleased with the reports he received about the recent round of interviews. Sitting at the head of the boardroom table, he listened as the hiring managers boasted about selecting only the best and most polished candidates. Their voices dripped with pride, but he saw arrogance where they saw standards. "And what about the other applicants?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm. The panel exchanged quick glances. Finally, one manager cleared his throat. "We filtered out those who lacked professionalism. You know how important appearances are for our company's reputation." Mr. Rahman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Appearances? Yes, sir," another added quickly. "For client-facing roles, we must ensure candidates present themselves well. It leaves a strong impression." The founder leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. He said nothing for a long moment, letting the silence grow heavy. Then, in a voice firm enough to silence the room, he said, "I want the applications of those you rejected placed back on my desk. All of them, immediately." The managers stiffened. "Sir, but, no excuses," he interrupted sharply. "Do it." Within hours, the files were gathered. Among them was Aisha's. Her simple resume, carefully typed and printed on inexpensive paper, stood out for its sincerity. Mr. Rahman remembered her face clearly, the way she had bent down to gather his papers without hesitation, her voice gentle but steady. That wasn't just professionalism, it was character. And he knew character was what built a company's true foundation. He called for a special review. The panel groaned inwardly but complied, unable to question the founder's authority. When Aisha's name surfaced, they rolled their eyes. "She's the one we dismissed immediately," one muttered, based on her presentation. "Then perhaps you dismissed her too quickly, Mr. Rahman replied, his tone like steel. "Call her back for another interview. This time, I'll sit in." 2 days later, Aisha was stunned when she received the phone call. She almost thought it was a cruel prank at first. "We'd like to invite you back for a second interview," the voice said. Her breath caught in her throat. She agreed at once, though doubt gnawed at her. Why would they suddenly reconsider her? Still, the sliver of hope was enough to spark life back into her eyes. On the morning of the interview, she dressed in the same carefully ironed blouse and skirt. Nothing new, nothing fancy, but she walked with a little more resolve. She told herself she had nothing to lose. When she stepped into the interview room again, she noticed immediately that something was different. The 3 panelists were there, their stiff smiles still in place, but seated at the end of the table was the elderly man she had helped. Her heart skipped a beat. "Good morning, Miss Khan," Mr. Rahman greeted warmly, his eyes kind. "Gee, good morning," she stammered, bowing her head respectfully. The interview began. The panelists fired questions at her, their tone sharper than before, as if eager to prove their earlier judgment correct. But this time, Aisha didn't shrink under their gaze. She spoke with quiet confidence, drawing on the nights she had studied by candlelight, the determination that had carried her through every hardship. She explained how she could adapt quickly, how she had solved problems creatively during her tutoring work, how she valued teamwork and integrity. The panelists exchanged doubtful glances, but Mr. Rahman leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her. "Tell me, Miss Khan," he asked, "why do you want to work here?" She hesitated for only a moment before answering truthfully. "Because I want to build a future where people like me, people without privilege, without polished appearances, can still prove themselves through hard work. I don't want just a job. I want a chance to grow, and to help others grow with me." Silence filled the room. Even the panelists were caught off guard by her sincerity. Mr. Rahman smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you, Miss Khan. That will be all for now." As she left the room, she felt different, not victorious, but heard. For the first time, she felt like her words had mattered more than her clothes. Behind closed doors, the discussion began. The panelists muttered objections, citing her lack of polish, but Mr. Rahman silenced them with a single statement: "If this company cannot recognize potential beyond appearances, then we are failing our mission. She stays." And with that, Aisha's fate began to change. The letter arrived 3 days later, tucked neatly into an envelope stamped with the company's seal. Aisha almost didn't open it, afraid it was another polite rejection. But her mother urged her, her hands trembling as she tore it open. Her eyes widened. "We are pleased to inform you," the words blurred as tears filled her vision. She pressed the letter to her chest, overwhelmed by relief and disbelief. For a moment she couldn't speak, but her mother read her expression and pulled her into a tight embrace. "You did it, Aisha. I knew you could." The following week, Aisha walked through the tall glass doors once again, this time as an employee. Her heart pounded, but she held her head higher than before. The same receptionist greeted her with a quick, surprised glance, as though she couldn't believe this young woman in simple clothes had been chosen after all. Aisha only smiled politely and moved forward, determined not to let pride or resentment touch her heart. Orientation was overwhelming. The other new hires whispered among themselves, some of them smirking when they looked at her modest outfit. She heard snatches of their comments, "How did she get in?" but she ignored them. Her focus was on learning, absorbing every bit of information. On her third day, she was summoned to the top floor. The founder himself wanted to see her. Nervously, she entered his office, which was lined with shelves of books and awards. Mr. Rahman stood by the window, gazing out over the city before turning toward her with a warm smile. "Miss Khan," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." She obeyed, clutching her notebook nervously. "I wanted to speak with you personally," he continued. "You showed me something important the day we met. Do you know what that was?" She shook her head, unsure. "Character," he said simply. "It is easy to teach skills, but impossible to teach heart. I saw your kindness when you didn't know who I was. That told me everything." Her throat tightened. "Thank you, sir. I only did what anyone should." "Not everyone would," he replied firmly. Then his eyes softened. "I'd like to mentor you directly. You have potential, and I intend to see it flourish." Her eyes widened. "Mentor me, sir? No protests," he said with a chuckle. "Consider it part of your role." And so it began. Over the next months, Aisha worked harder than she ever had. Mr. Rahman invited her to sit in on meetings, encouraged her to ask questions, and taught her how decisions were made at the highest levels. Slowly, she grew more confident, her voice steady when she spoke, her ideas thoughtful and practical. But not everyone welcomed her rise. Some of the managers who had dismissed her still muttered behind her back. One afternoon, during a heated discussion about hiring policies, a senior manager sneered, "With all due respect, sir, we cannot let appearances slide. Clients expect polish. If we lower our standards, we risk our reputation." Mr. Rahman's gaze hardened. "So you would prefer a well-dressed liar over a humble truth-teller?" The manager faltered, but before he could reply, Aisha spoke up. "Sir, may I say something?" All eyes turned to her. She swallowed her nerves and continued. "When I first walked into this company, I was judged for what I wore, not what I could offer. That nearly cost me an opportunity to prove myself. If we measure people by clothes alone, we might be turning away some of the brightest minds, people who could transform this company." The room fell silent. Even those who doubted her couldn't ignore the conviction in her voice. Mr. Rahman smiled, pride glinting in his eyes. "Well said. And let this be a reminder, we must value substance over surface. This company will not be built on empty polish." From that day forward, things began to shift. Hiring policies were revised to emphasize skills and character above appearances. Training programs were launched to support candidates from underprivileged backgrounds. Slowly, the culture of the company began to change. Aisha became a symbol of that change. Her colleagues who once whispered now sought her advice. She treated everyone with humility, never forgetting the pain of being overlooked. She encouraged new hires, reminding them that their worth was not in their clothes but in their effort and integrity. Months later, she walked into the lobby again, this time with a quiet confidence that radiated from within. The same receptionist greeted her with respect, and she returned the smile warmly. She no longer felt like an outsider. She belonged, not because she had changed her clothes, but because she had proved her worth. And as she stepped into the elevator to join another board meeting beside her mentor, she whispered a silent promise to herself, that she would use her position to ensure no one else would ever be rejected for the same reason she had been. She had started as a girl dismissed for her appearance. Now, she was a woman shaping the future of a company, living proof that true value lies not in what you wear, but in who you are.